We are back on the channel today for a slightly different video where I am joined by a guest because I wanted to do a video about RIZIN's Kai Asakura and his signing with the UFC and kind of what people can expect, because I think that, like myself, a lot of people maybe hear about RIZIN every now and then but don't follow it super closely. So I thought I would reach out to someone that does follow it very closely. So I am joined today on the channel by Andrew from We Are RIZIN. I think a lot of people who I know that are big RIZIN fans, you are their go-to kind of person for through the podcast for RIZIN news to recap all these cards and stuff like that. So I appreciate you being here. I did already check out your recap of the last event where this news broke, so I got a rough idea kind of how you're feeling about this news. But first of all, man, like I said, thank you for being here and taking the time to do this.
No problem. I got it. So when did you see the recap? Because I got copyright struck by a Bema, and I'm not so sure. When did you happen to watch it? If you don't mind me asking.
So I watched it like a week ago when we first set this up, and then I watched it again earlier today, like on the live recording
Oh, okay.
version on the channel.
I
Yeah, I
don't know
did see about
how.
that.
Yes, I don't know how that works because I did appeal it. So I don't know if by appealing it, it's now open, or if Abima has taken away the copyright. But I remember I got the copyright strike, and people were like, "Oh, I can't watch now." And so like I don't know if that opens it up, but I'm glad that it's to hear that somehow people that you got to watch it. So that's at least good.
Yeah. And I mean, there was a lot to get to. I'm sure for you on that episode. It feels like it's one of those periods in the year where I feel like there's a few moments every year where suddenly RIZIN becomes like global MMA news, right? They have a few things, maybe a few signings, maybe a few big fights that, really grab the interest of the general MMA fan, or at least the general MMA media. And I mean, between Mayweather versus Suzuki and then this Kai news, which I mean, we could do a whole nother video on that Mayweather fight. I'd listened to your kind of take on it already, so I know how you feel about that. But as I said, we're here to talk about Kai Asakura. I have already heard your thoughts, but in kind of to sum it up in general, what was your initial reaction to Kai announcing that he had signed to the UFC and he'd be vacating the RIZIN Bantamweight title? Like, was this something you anticipated that was coming at any point soon?
I think it was. I think it was eventually going to happen. I'm not. I'm a Rising fan. I'll say that first and foremost. UFC is not on my radar as much, but Kai was talking about wanting to go to the UFC. Probably, I think, as far back as maybe 1 or 2 years ago is when I first heard him starting to talk about it. Not to mention as well, he did some training in the United States. Went to the UFC PI as well. I think he trained at Syndicate in the United States, if I remember correctly. Other than that, yeah, he's been definitely focused on the UFC. In terms of what my thoughts are, I'm not surprised, but it's kind of a little disappointing that he did not defend the title once, because he just kind of won the title and then vacated it. I kind of think that does set a bad precedent. That's something that like you do when you become champion of LFA, CFFC, one of those types of promotions. And by doing that, I think it sends a message that, oh, if you once you become champion, you can then kind of just leave and not do your due diligence to at least defend it once. Because I thought they have a show coming up next month, Super Rising 3. And I thought that they would do like, oh, he's going to defend it on that one, presumably be successful, and then announce, hey, I'm going to UFC after that. But no, that didn't happen. Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts, my general thoughts on him. I'm happy about him, just kind of not happy about the circumstances that happened about it overall.
Yeah, I remember covering a story from a couple of months ago. I believe it was from when Sakakibara had the meeting with Dana White, and I think he posted himself on social media to be like, "I want Kai and Horiguchi, who obviously hasn't gone, to go to the UFC. I feel like they deserve it and stuff like that." And it was a little bit strange because I mean that's incredibly bold of him to. I heard you say on the recap podcast actually about how sometimes RIZIN are maybe a little bit too nice to some of their fighters, and I think that was I don't think there's any other promoter that would have done that and said, you're one of our big stars and I will negotiate this move for you. Like, there isn't really a precedent. I know that there have been fighters go from Ryzen to the UFC before, some really big names in the UFC. Obviously, you already mentioned like Yuri and stuff, but there isn't really a precedent for this. Like you said, it isn't an LFA where people like in England, we have Cage Warriors, and it's like when you win a Cage Warriors title, you maybe defend it once or twice, and then you're off. You go to the UFC. It's what happens, and so it is a little bit rarer, I suppose, for Ryzen, which maybe is why it's more surprising, I guess.
Oh no, I absolutely agree. And you say the Cage Warriors. I was like, oh, I remember Bama. That used to be like, oh, if you won
Yeah,
the championship with Bama, boom, you're off the UFC. Like Jimmy Manuwa and all those guys way back when. Yeah, I think it's a little bit strange that pushing for it so much like Barber, because I even asked him in my interview of him, like, what do you think about when fighters who you sign for a fight, they come to your press conference, they're like, oh, after this fight, I want to then go to UFC. And he said that like basically sum up, he said that he understands why I say it, but he kind of doesn't like that they kind of just want to make that move so quickly and so kind of like brashly. You do have to be a little bit. Listen, there's the polar opposite of like one, which is like maybe the worst type of UFC of MMA contract there is. Probably even worse than like a UFC contract at this point. Then you have the like polar opposite, which is Ryzen, which is like, oh, we'll help you get signs to our competition. And so I do think. I mean, I'll say this though, the views on their Kai Asakura going to UFC thing is getting getting a lot of views on their YouTube channel, and it's gotten a lot of press here on surprisingly from a lot of MMA outlets. So I guess short term it seems to be good, but I'm curious to see how long term, how much like if this is going to come up again where somebody wins a championship and then will Ryzen help them will try to help them get to UFC, or will they just try to sign with UFC right off the bat? Or I'm curious to see long term, like how other fighters are going to approach this.
yeah. Like in terms of, I suppose they must have very good faith and confidence in him going to the UFC and being very successful. Like in terms of how ready he is to go into the UFC's bantamweight division and mix it up with those top guys. How ready do you see him being ready in that field? Because, like I said, this Ryzen to UFC thing isn't a regular occurrence, and we've seen some big names go over from Ryzen to the UFC who, don't get me wrong, were excellent in Ryzen. So it wasn't like they came out of nowhere, but they have been very successful in the UFC, the likes of Yuri, like we mentioned, but Manel Cap as well, obviously a former opponent of Kai's. So how well do you see him doing? Like, does it feel, is it just too early because he didn't defend the bantamweight title, or was it a little bit surprising just in terms of like, is he ready for that just yet?
So first of all, I think it looks like he's probably going to go to bantamweight, but oh man, like he started out his career as flyweight, but that was early in his career, and then the rest of his career has been in bantamweight. If he's unsuccessful, if he like gets murked in his first bantamweight fight, then maybe he'll go to flyweight, which God forbid, that's going to be a brutal weight cut for that gentleman. I think he's a fighter that he is exceptional striking skills, very good power. He's not a brawler type. He knows if he's got to kind of if he's got to pick and choose his shots, he'll do that with a fight. And sometimes it doesn't lead to the most exciting fights, but hey, that's if he recognizes that's how he's got to win, that's how he'll do it. He kind of did that with the Manel Cape fight, kind of just out grappled Cape in their first fight. And I'm curious to see though, like how he'll stack up against somebody like a Henry Cejudo type or Corey Sandhagen. I think Dana White came out with like the whiteboard videos, I call them, or whatever they're called. I think it was Sonya Dong versus Kai that was written on the board, if I heard correctly. I could be wrong about that, but that would be an interesting fight as well against Sonya Dong. I want to see though, like how he stacks up against like those top 10, top 15 fighters. I think he could do exceptional against unranked guys, particularly. But once like we get into the guys who are really, really good, I don't want to say that I don't have. I have to see how he does. Then I can make a judgment against him, because even with his win against Cape, it was a very close fight, and the win against Horiguchi, Horiguchi came to that fight injured pretty much, and Kai lost both rematches. So I definitely want to see how he stacks up against those ranked guys. Then I'll be able to fully make a, oh yeah, he's a UFC uh, level talent fighter.
Yeah, I think obviously the thing for a lot of UFC fans, that say, "Oh, who is this guy?" and they look at his record, they're gonna instantly see Manel Cap and go, "Okay, well, he's a top 10 flyweight contender, potentially one win away from a title shot, even with the state of that division at the moment, and that they need a guy really to take on Pantoja." Obviously, slightly different circumstances because Cap did move down to flyweight. Were you surprised that Kai didn't make the decision to move down?
I mean, if you look at his frame, he's a very lanky guy.
Mm.
I'm that was a big debate we had in the Rise Discord. Like, is he going to go to bantamweight? Is he going to go to bantamweight or flyweight? If he tries to go to flyweight, man, that I don't think he can make flyweight at this point. He can try if he shaves his head, maybe he could try. But like, if Cape is even like if Cape is struggling to make flyweight, I can't see how Kai can do it. I mean, if he gets the right nutritionist, perhaps he can. But for his own health and safety, I would much rather see him at bantamweight.
Yeah. I was going to bring up about his strengths and weaknesses. I feel like we already touched on it mostly. I feel like the big thing that people are gonna throw at him when he does, get that UFC debut announced and things like that is going to be how is he going to cope with the best wrestlers in the bantamweight division, right? That's always going to be the talking point, and he is known for his striking over anything else. Like, is there anyone I can't say that I've seen it from my own experiences of watching Kai, which I've seen a fair few of his fights at this stage. Is there anyone that's like really, really tested him grappling wise, in terms of how the fight played out, but also in terms of their credentials? I'm sure, again, I mentioned the Manel Cap fight because a lot of modern, people who watch the UFC right now will be very familiar with Manel Cap, and then I'm sure people who have watched MMA for a little bit longer will know all about Horiguchi, even if it's just from his UFC career. I'm sure they will know the Bellator career and the Rising career as well. But yeah, is there kind of proven track record at the moment for Kai Asakura facing grapplers and how well he does against them?
Yeah. I mean, he has. Let's see. He in Ryzen. Like the Kyoji fight. Like you said, Okazaki also fought, and then wound up breaking Oka's jaw in that fight. Um, so he has another grappler. Actually, funny enough, lost in the rematch as well to this guy, Hiromasa Ogikubo. First fight, just steamroll him. It was in this just like it was like no question who was a better fighter. But second fight was he had just come off fighting, I believe it was Kenta Takizawa in the bantamweight tournament, and it was one of those same day where he fought in the semifinals and the finals. Problem was that he broke his hand in that fight, and so he couldn't defend against any of Ogikubo's grappling, and just kind of just got grapple effed for 3 rounds. That's the other thing. If you want to talk about weakness as well, it's not so much one of his outside weaknesses is that he has injured his hand, broken his hand like 2 or 3 times, and has had fights canceled for them. He's a very injury prone fighter, which I do not know if Barra told Dana that, but I do not be surprised if there is a fight that comes out that he has a fight and then if winds up he has to cancel it because he broke his hand in training, because that's happened quite quite a few times. But yeah, going back to your question about grappling, Okubo is a great example of someone who just did that for him for 3 rounds. Again, he had a broken hand, and I think probably if he hadn't broke his hand, he probably would have beaten Okubo again. But yeah, like when it comes to grappling, like when it comes to like the Cejudos or like those high level grapplers, the Nurmagomedovs, Umar. I want like that. Those are the real tests for him for UFC. To see if he'll be a successful fighter in the UFC.
Yeah, I know that you mentioned that you don't follow the UFC super closely anymore, but like clearly, you're still very much in the know of who is in and around the bantamweight division right now for like potential matchups. In terms of, we mentioned that the wrestlers, the top wrestlers in the division, would be tough for him, which is a little bit scary when you've got like Henry Cejudo and Merab Dvalishvili at the top of the division right now. But in terms of like best matchups for Kai, is there someone that sticks out in the UFC that you're like, I would love to see him fight that guy at sooner or later? Not necessarily the debut, but at some point.
Well, I got the top 15 rankings right now, and actually, also Japanese Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. There was a lot of rumors going around that his debut fight might be Dominic Cruz. That was being passed around, which I think that's a pretty fair fight to make. Cruz does not grapple. I don't think he's ever grappled, as far as I'm concerned. I think that's an interesting striker's delight, to quote my friend Jay Wolf, and would be a good test for Kai as well. I mean, Jose Aldo, I think, is a very interesting fight. I know it's funny that I don't think Aldo really does that much grappling, but he's still on point with the striking and all that. So I think that would also be an incredible test for him. Also, just a roundabout fact is that Jose Aldo had that what was it? He's fought in Pancrase before, so he's got that little Japanese connection as well. So I think that'd be a little interesting historical nugget as well. I think those are probably the two ones I would do. I would not put him up against like a Corey Sandhagen or God of War, even Rob Font at this point yet. I think it's somebody who I would love to see him more against a veteran rather than someone who's already climbing up the rankings at this point.
Yeah. I think this could, factor into what you were just saying, because I was going to mention about how I think one of the things that caught a lot of people's eyes, especially if they weren't familiar with him until this point, is when you go on YouTube and you look at his fight highlights, they have crazy views. And I think that probably does lean into when you look at potential opponents, when a lot of the UFC fan base isn't going to know him, but of course every UFC fan knows someone like a Dominic Cruz, so you give them that so that they can get introduced to Kai Asakura, taking on a legend that everyone already knows and loves in Dominic Cruz. I think that seems quite likely that something like that will happen. But in terms of his following, right, because the UFC has kind of a weird relationship with having Asian stars. It kind of feels like they have been lacking that real, like, I know that obviously you have Zhang Wei Li, and of course they had the first ever all Chinese title fight at UFC 300 and stuff like that. So they are definitely making improvements, but it does feel like it's been a really slow crawl to get to this point where they're starting to get some stars over in Asia. And then you look at Kai Asakura's numbers and potentially how much of the RIZIN following follows him over to watch him in the UFC. I don't know whether it's, a little bit more like loyal to RIZIN, or whether you think a lot of his fans will go with him to watch his UFC fights. But obviously, it goes without saying, you take one look at those numbers and he could end up being huge for the UFC, specifically when it comes to breaking into Asia and kind of, because it just feels like for a long time it was kind of ignored. I know that they do events in Asia like once or twice a year maybe, but it still does feel a little bit of a sleeping giant for the UFC at least.
The other reason is because UFC has never successfully sold out a show in Japan. All their shows have been undersold, and from what I've heard, they actually had to give away tickets to a lot of those shows. I think the last show in Japan was that. I think it was Mark. Didn't Mark Hunt? Was it like one of his last fights for US? I can't remember, but this was a long time ago. I think it was definitely. I think it was pre-pandemic even. That's how.
Yeah, I can't remember the last Japan one. Yeah.
And I don't think any of their fights ever had a Japanese star in the main event, as far as I'm concerned. So it was always like Josh Barnett. I think it was Josh Barnett, who's kind of Japanese adjacent, but right, never a pure Japanese star. And I do think that UFC is going to do that. I think they're going to try to they're going to definitely try to get into the Japanese market, which is a lot of companies are doing that now. WWE is doing that now. It looks like UFC is going to be trying. We got one that tried and was not successful. So now Japan's becoming a hotbed for. I probably because it's their economy kind of sucks right now, and it's probably a lot cheaper to run an event there than it may have been like years ago. So I think I think probably UFC is looking to would love to probably put Kai and Tyra in a main event, co-main event spot, or main card at least somewhere down the line. Saitama. As for the fans, I do think a lot of his fans will definitely come to see him at a show in Japan if they do book him for that. This is a case of where like, yeah, he may not be known in America, but like Japan, like I can tell you that he is incredibly well known. Probably his brother's a little bit more well known, but Kai is even non-MMA fans know who Kai Asakura was, who he is. It'll probably be big news once his fight is booked in UFC.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you feel like, if somebody was like, all right, give me the breakdown on Kai Asakura, is there anything we've left out that is worth mentioning?
Oh boy, let's see. I'm curious to know if he's going to still. So he trains at a camp in Japan, Tokyo, called Japan Top Team, which has tried to emulate the American style of training, like what they do at ATT, aka they've even brought over American coaches. Vince Morales was briefly coaching Kai for one of his fights on New Year's Eve. I'm curious to know if he'll stick with that camp, if he's going to go back and forth, or if he's just going to try to stay like in Vegas or something like that. And then I'm really curious to see how he does that, because I think surprisingly, I mean Tyra might be the exception, but I think fighters that have that were trained in Japan, like Horiguchi, but then staked their claim in the United States, went on to become much better fighters, and we can see obviously the success that Horiguchi has had with UFC and RIZIN. And then I'm trying to think as well. There was other fighters who I'm trying to think of. I know Kinoshita. Kinoshita is now at Kill Cliff as well. So yeah, I'm curious to see what he decides to do training wise, because that could also, because I mean that going back and forth is brutal. That is a brutal travel schedule. So yeah, I'm curious to see what he does with that.
The final thing I wanted to quickly mention, I know that you briefly mentioned it already, but with RIZIN's next event that's coming up, but in terms of stuff that's coming up soon from RIZIN, whether it be a big event, a fighter that people should be looking out for people who, they hear RIZIN and they might know, like I said, a few of the really big names or big fights that have happened over the last few years. But for people who don't follow it super closely, what should they be penciling in on the calendar to keep an eye out for?
Well, they're running a huge show next month, July 28th at the Saitama Super Arena. They recently announced a collaboration crossover thing with BKFC. They're having 2 BKFC rules fights on the card, including 2 just BKFC fighters, Ty Emery and Charissa. I'm forgetting her last name, but Ty Emery is the one who flashed the Thai crowd when she won, which I would not recommend doing that in Japan because she will be arrested. That will not be a good experience for her. Kai's brother, legitimately the most I would say the Conor McGregor of Japanese MMA at this point, Mikuru, is taking on Ren Hiramoto, another really incredibly popular fighter. Both trash talkers, both very bad boy style. They don't like each other and all that. So I believe that's going to be the main event. The co-main, Chihiro versus Manny Pacquiao, which is supposed to be whatever exhibition not kickboxing, but boxing match. I mean, that's whatever. I'm not a fan of those for many reasons. On the so like I said, oh John Dotson's taking on a guy named Takagi Soya in a BKFC rules fights as well. So they got two BKFC matches, and then I think they're supposed to announce two, maybe three more fights for that. But yeah, the rest of the card has regular Ryzen regulars, former champions, and it's definitely gonna. They opened up, so Saitama Arena is actually two arenas. They have like a small portion and a bigger portion. They open up the bigger portion for this arena, so they're banking on a full sellout. And I can't remember the last time. Probably had to be one of the Pride shows where that the big arena was opened up. So, oh man, this I've actually rising to go all out. Like, I don't know if they'll have the drum ceremony, but I'm predicting they'll have a big bombastic production, and that's that we can watch it here stateside on Ryzen.tv, which is their own streaming service.
Sweet. Well, I look forward to it, and I look forward to hopefully when we find out some more news about Kai, because I'm excited to watch the debut. Like I said at the start, man, thank you for your time, and like I said before we started recording, we'll have to do this again sometime when there isn't, like a pressing topic to talk about, and we can just catch up about Ryzen and what it's like to cover it, because like you said, I think that there's a lot of people who maybe they don't know what's going on day to day with Ryzen and stuff like that. So it'd be cool to do, my man. But yeah, until then, thank you for your time.
No, appreciate it, Kyle. Thank you so much.